because I don't want to think everything is paranormal. I find it interesting.
Yeah.
And now that I'm living some things, it changes things.
It gets a bit intense.
Yes.
I'm serious. I would have never bought a house here. Never, ever.
I looked on the corner of my eye and I saw something right there, and I did a double take, and it was gone.
She's like, if you get physical proof that this stuff is happening, I can't live here. And we can't afford to move.
Welcome to Houston Strange. My name is Adam, and I will be your host. I've lived in Houston since January of 2020, and throughout my brief time here, I've come across several stories specifically from Houston and the surrounding areas, which just seem kind of lost to time. They're not secret, they're not forgotten, they're just kind of hard to find. A handful of times while researching other topics or related subjects for other work, I've stumbled upon some snippets or tidbits of local Houston history that caught my attention, such as the Houston Heights Batman, which was reported by 5 witnesses on June 18th, 1953. Hilda and Lloyd Walker told journalists what they had experienced in the early hours of the morning. They had been out sitting on their porch, presumably just trying to enjoy the slightly cooler temperatures that the early morning hours provide. All of a sudden, this shadow settled in a tree. We all looked up and saw a Batman. He was balancing himself on a tree limb, and there was a dim grey light all around him. She described him as being a white man, about 6.5 feet tall, wearing a black cape, skin-tight dark pants and quarter-length boots. She went on to say, "I could see him plainly and could see he had big wings folded at his shoulders." They sat, stunned, watching this mysterious visitor for a few moments until suddenly a bright white flame and smoke shot from behind him and a burning object resembling a, quote, flying paintbrush whisked him away into the night sky. Now, this story was corroborated by Walker's landlady, her daughter, and another resident of the building. There's also the tale of a family who attempted to sue the company who built their neighbourhood because they conveniently forgot to mention that they had actually built their houses on top of an old graveyard. The judge sided with the property developers, by the way. Or even the fact that the Texas Rangers have a team of police officers specially trained in hypnosis, a practice which they only stopped in 2021. Then there was also the incredible UFO sighting just outside the Houston area on December 29th, 1980, which left witnesses hospitalized with symptoms of radiation sickness. Later, I even worked with a gentleman who just organically mentioned that he was actually in school with the boy from that case. These stories are tangible. They're just out of reach. Like we got to the corner just in time to see the bus pulling away from the stop. My goal with Houston Strange is to try and draw some of these stories out from the woodwork. Maybe to save some of them from being completely lost, or even better, to find some that have never seen the light of day until now. In this episode, I will introduce you to a family who are living in a Houston suburb where history seems destined to repeat itself. The family have been experiencing doors opening and closing of their own accord, objects moving, potential shadow people, and their children even seem to be seeing things, seemingly communicating with people that aren't actually there. We'll be using pseudonyms and beeping out names of people and places where necessary to protect the family's identities, but I first met up with Mike in early 2024. We'd been talking back and forth for a few months online and finally decided to do an in-person interview. It was a little bit like a first Tinder date. We picked a public location, which we were both familiar with, a bar where I had done some photography, which just happened to be next door to where Mike worked. Now, this led to some interesting audio conundrums as we were recording outside on a patio in Midtown Houston, and of course, it started to rain. Because of the live nature of these interviews, the audio throughout this series will vary greatly, but that's just all a part of the adventure.
I guess to start with my story, it starts back in 2019. Me and my wife, we were looking to buy a home, and we actually had found a foreclosed home in the exact area that we're discussing, which we thought was a good value, but then we were told hey, you could buy a brand new house in this 1960s community. And so we moved in 2019 and we were overjoyed. And for a good year, nothing ever happened. We lived normally. I went to work. My wife stayed at home. She's new to the area at that time. And we got the exciting news that we were expecting a little one. And oddly, that's when things started to kind of show up at the house. The first experience that we ever had was, it was actually just me that was really involved with it in it. We were in the hallway. The room splits. When you first walk into the front door, you have the two front rooms, and then right across those two front rooms is the garage, or the entry to the garage. And then you go back, and we have a large living room and a kitchen, and the master was kind of towards the back. We were in the hallway in between the two bedrooms. And as of right at that moment, those two bedrooms were kind of storage. We weren't usually using them for anything, but we had cleared one of them out, and we were retrofitting it as a nursery. So one day we were building the crib, and I went outside into the garage, and I grabbed the crib, and it was one of those big bulky things. I'm struggling to get it through the door, and I go to grab the doorknob, and I got the door open, and it ripped out of my hand. The weird thing about it is, and after, it happened, is I sat down and I thought about it for a second, and I was like, well, the garage is closed. The front door is closed. And our house is interesting because all the doors, it's a modern thing where they have the vents under the door. So, we understand at the exact same time that if you close a door, it can create suction. And so my house, because it has vents underneath all these doors, it doesn't create that. And so when I looked up, I was expecting to see my wife was helping me, but she was in the nursery. So how the door opened with nothing, no front door open, no windows open, no one on the other side, it kind of was like, what just happened here? But in my mind, I was like, you know what? There's probably a logical explanation for this that I can't think of. And I thought nothing of it at the time. It just crossed my mind for a second. It was the first thing that ever happened. It was whatever. I want to say it was after my daughter's birth was when the second experience came along. My wife at that time had decided that she was going to be a stay-at-home mother, and she still is home all the time at taking care of the kids. I had came home from work one day. I was in the bathroom, and she just comes in, and and I don't mean this in an insulting way, she's a very monotone type of girl. She has her expressions, that kind of stuff, but as of in you and me talking face to face, she is very stoic, if that's the best way I can put it. So you don't get a lot of reaction, but she came into the bathroom bursting in and was like, I just saw somebody walk across our floor. And I said, what do you mean? And she's like, I saw someone walk across, and she's like, I had my back turned. I was at the stove, and I saw it in my peripheral vision, and I thought it was you walking towards the nursery. And she's like, I even talked to it. It didn't say anything back, but she's like, I turned around. There's no one there. I promise you, I saw somebody. And getting that sort of reaction out of her, that was a big deal. Because like I said, she's very stoic in her reactions. And so I kind of just walked around the house. I didn't see anything. And we had not heard the legacy of the community yet. And so for me, it was just like, maybe something was playing in her head. Like, I didn't write it off yet that it was not haunted, but I didn't believe that it was haunted.
Over the last few years, I've dedicated maybe a little bit too much time to reading every book about haunted houses, poltergeist cases, and just high strangeness in general. It's become a bit of an obsession, to be honest. One emerging theme throughout a lot of these stories that I've read, though, is that sometimes these things take time. One incident in the first week of moving into a new place easily brushed off, then another one 6 months later, 2 years later, then all of a sudden, in hindsight, you've been living in a haunted house for the last 5-10 years. Mike and his wife, who we'll call Susan, are very rational and quite skeptical people, as you'll hear throughout the stories, the way they tried to find reasonable explanations for their experiences. Not long after living in this house, they were presented the opportunity to buy another house a few streets over in the same neighbourhood. And it wasn't long until they did learn the legacy of their community.
We had moved into the other house, and we had started showing my old house. And I say old, it's only 2019, so it's not that old. But we had a guy come up, and he goes, "So you guys don't mind living on a graveyard, huh?" And I'm like, taken back when he tells me about this. And he's like, "Yeah," he's like, "You don't know about this area? They didn't tell you?" And I was like, "No, please enlighten me." And he goes, "Yeah, this is an old graveyard. It's over on..." And so I started down a rabbit hole of an investigation. And the first thing that pops up was a unsolved mysteries of this community. And the first thing that I see when that first flyover of the community was the entrance. And I said, "Oh crap." Because obviously that was the entrance to my community. And then I got into Googling bodies found. And there was an article as recent of 2.5 years. And this was in 2020 when I had, or sorry, it would have been 2021 when I had started researching this. And I was like, okay, that's a little scary.
How would you feel if you found out your neighbours had discovered human remains in their back garden? That your property might house secrets just like this too? Now I'm going to briefly divulge into the story behind the town of Crosby, Texas. This area is rich with history of a particularly Texan flavour though, and if you're interested in learning more, I do urge you to do your own digging. The story goes that Mercer McKinney, a plantation owner in Crosby during Civil War times, was also a slave owner. After June 19, 1865, thanks to Land Redistribution Acts, the McKinneys gave up some of their land to local freedmen and women. This piece of land soon grew into a bustling little community with a school, a church and several homes. It was supposedly first known as McNair or the McNair Settlement, and then eventually became known as Black Hope. Tragically, this community fell victim to fire and all of the buildings, presumably made of wood, were lost. The survivors of this horrific event moved to nearby Barrett Station, which was and still is to this day a strong and growing black community. The town of McNair, or Black Hope, was ruined, but the cemetery remained in use for years. The last known burial to take place there was 1939. As the years passed and these graves became weathered and lost to time, the cemetery was ultimately forgotten to history, except for the 1 or 2 surviving family members of the people who were buried there. The final death blow to the cemetery was that it had never officially been registered to Harris County. As borders were redrawn and zoning changed, the cemetery vanished from new maps completely. Eventually, the land was sold to Purcell property developers in the 1970s, and they began building a new neighbourhood which would eventually become the home of our friends Mike and Susan. Now I know what you're thinking. How much of this is actually true? It sounds too good, too Hollywood to be real. Well, after literally hours of searching, trawling through old maps, newspaper archives, court documents, local Facebook historical societies, I can safely say, I don't know. Mercer McKinney definitely was a real person. His great-great-grandson actually recovered and replaced his headstone a few years back, just a few miles south of the town. The earliest map that I could find is from 1879, and this shows all of the landowners at that time and how the plots were divided. Now, Mercer died around 1863, but he did have 4 sons, 4 daughters, and a surviving wife, so I assume that his plantation would have still been active, but the name McKinney doesn't appear anywhere on the map. I know for a fact that the family were still around because I found some rather unsavoury newspaper articles naming a McKinney descendant as the sheriff of the town in the early 1920s. But the only clue as to the land they had once owned was an ambiguously named plot, roughly where our friend's neighbourhood is today. Maybe it's just as simple as the family didn't actually own the property but rented and worked the land. It's not to say that the story doesn't have some truth to it though. This is an excerpt from law.justia.com. Samuel and Judith Haney brought suit against Purcell Company Incorporated after 2 human graves were discovered in the backyard of their residence. On March 16, 1981, the Haneys purchased a house from Purcell in the Newport subdivision of Crosby, Texas. During construction of the Haneys' residence, Al Summerlin, Purcell's field superintendent, was informed by an unidentified person that at least 1 human grave existed on the land. Summerlin examined the alleged gravesite and observed a short fence around it, as well as a stick with a cross. Because Summerlin, quote, didn't know whether a dog was buried there or anything, he told the tractorman to take it all out. Thereafter, the debris was hauled off and dumped. In April 1983, the Haneys began construction of a swimming pool in the backyard of their residence. After observing the pool contractor's equipment going into the Haneys' backyard, L.D. Ressler, a long-time local resident, informed Mr. Haney of the possibility that a grave was located in the vicinity. Ressler came to this conclusion because he had previously seen a fence enclosing a small evergreen bush in this area. Shortly thereafter, the Haneys learned that the area near their house had been known as the Black Hope Addition graveyard. In September 1983, the Haneys had their backyard excavated and 2 human graves were found. The bodies were moved to a perpetual care cemetery at Purcell's request and expense. The Haneys filed suit in February of 1984 for damages based on breach of contract, alleged title defects, negligence, fraud, breach of express warranty, breach of implied warranty of merchantability, and violations of the Deceptive Trade Practices Consumer Protection Act. After a jury trial, the trial court rendered judgment that the Haneys take nothing, and the Court of Appeals affirmed. The jury found that the property in question had been abandoned as a cemetery before the Haneys purchased it. Now, as far as I can tell, this case, or at least the appeal, actually made it to the Texas Supreme Court. This, in my opinion, cements the story as more than just local lore, regardless of how the origins may be construed. The Haneys court case had clearly made for some attention-grabbing headlines back in the day, and the story was passed on from one person to the next, eventually ending up on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, which was very popular back in the 90s. But the legacy of Black Hope found its way to the ears of our friend Mike through the oldest means known to man: word of mouth. Now at this point, Mike had already purchased not 1 but 2 properties in the neighbourhood, and his wife was now a stay-at-home mom with not just a toddler but a newborn baby as well. It's safe to say, Mike did what pretty much anyone in this situation would have done. He kept his mouth firmly shut.
We were maybe 3 days in to the new house. My son was maybe about 6 months old, maybe younger, and I had my daughter. And at that time, we had just found out that she's autistic, and she's nonverbal autistic. And we were sitting in the living room, I think, while I was trying to show my wife or my daughter the Goofy movie. You know, it's something I grew up with, and I was, kind of happy to show them that. Because of my wife being of the Vietnamese culture, they didn't really get into that kind of stuff. But we were sitting there on the couch. All of a sudden, this gray playpin ball, one shot. And I mean, it wasn't just a roll. It shot out of the room. And it was about 3 or, I want to say a good 3 to 5 inches off the ground. It was very low. It was maybe, I want to say that high. And it hit the wall. And it kind of just bounced back. And me and my wife both saw this. And we just kind of was like silence. It was just a shocked silence. And so I walked into the master, and my son is asleep in that room. And I really start to try to find out how could this ball had shot out as hard as it did, because it was not just a lump like somebody just kind of toss a ball. It shot out of the room. And I looked to see if there was any toys that could possibly have done it. Our AC vent is offset, so if it did get pushed by the AC, it would have gone into the wall. There was no chance that the AC could have done it. And so I looked everywhere to try to think, okay, what could have caused this? We never did come with a solution. And so we went living on. And as we learned more of my daughter's disabilities, it seemed the more that we honed in on that, the more we started to see it happening around her. One of the major things that had happened was we were in the new house, the master bedroom, from the bed, I can see into her room directly. Like I can see her bed in from my bed. And the layout of the new house makes it very convenient because it's the living room's directly in the middle, and mine I can see right into the kids' rooms. And one night we were in bed and we had not gotten any type of night lights or anything as of yet. And my wife grabbed my hand full force. And I look over and she is staring into my daughter's room. I look over right when I see that, and I kind of start seeing the door starting to close. And I'm like, that's strange. So I got up immediately, and I thought it could possibly be my daughter screwing around. I mean, at that time, she's only 2 years old. Kids get out of bed and they mess around. But my daughter was dead asleep in her bed. I walked into the room and I saw nothing. And I walked back and I was like, honey, what'd you see? And she's like, I saw a black mass that was at least 4 feet off the ground, shoot by the door, and then the door started to close after. And she's like, it was instantaneous. She said, I saw the ball, and then I saw the door. And that's when I had turned around and I started seeing the door. And so, ironically, right after that, that's when my daughter started coming into my room about 3 a.m. Now, doing research, that could be a kid thing that doesn't have to do with the paranormal. It could be a learned behavior. It could be any one of those things. And I don't know if it's an autistic thing. I don't know if it's her, but sometimes I'd see her staring into like a certain point, like if it's just at a wall, and she'd sit there for a good couple minutes and then go on her merry way. I can only say out of all the times that she came in one night and she was terrified. It's only happened once, so it could have been a bad dream. But considering what we've seen in her room, I have to take that into consideration. Moving on with the story, we thought that we should tell my sister, who had just moved down from California to be with us. And we told her the history of the community. And she took it more as a joke. She's like, hey, I get to hang out with the ghosts and things like that. She didn't really take it seriously. And it seemed like the ghost didn't like that. Or whatever was there didn't like it. Because all of a sudden, right in front of us, a toy went off. It was a little car steering wheel. And all of a sudden, it honked its horn and lit up. So you have to press a middle button, the horn, for it to activate that. And we both looked at it and I said, hey, see, I told you. And we meant it as more of just like, because I knew she didn't believe, it was more in jest. But it also aroused some suspicions because I'm sitting here going like, okay, let me try to take an objective look at this again. Did my daughter brush by it 5 minutes ago? I don't think so. She was playing in her room at the time. I try to sit here and think of, what this, but then right after that, my TV turned on by itself. And then it turned off. And then it turned back on. Me being what I do for a living, that's very implausible because I'm linked to a full control system. It will not turn on unless I tell it to. And it's not one of those TVs that are just going to be, if it were to lose power and then it just turns automatically on, it's one of those frame televisions. So if it was to do that, if power were to fail, it's going to go to the art portion of it. It's not going to go to the full-on television. And this went straight to the TV portion. And it did it twice. And I sat there and I looked at it and I was like, okay, that's peculiar. And so when that first happened, I thought it was a malfunction. Maybe I need to do something with the programming. I don't know. A week later, it did the exact same thing at 3 a.m. I saw it turn on, and it stayed on for about a good 2 minutes, and it shut itself off.
It's another really common occurrence,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
In these situations. But when you think about it, right, Joey from Friends said it, if you have no TV, what do you point your furniture at?
Right? That's
So
a good one.
if you want to get somebody's attention,
Yeah.
the TV is the best way to do it, right?
And since I do it for a living, you know, of course, my eyes are always trained to speakers and TVs and
Right.
all that kind of good stuff. And I know their inner workings enough to know how they react in certain situations.
Right.
So this one threw me for a loop. On a different night, it was my son's room, and he's got a little tiny little TV, just something we'll usually put like Dory's little cam on there, and the sound of the ocean just kind of puts him to sleep. But then all of a sudden, what's even stranger about this is that there's no cable box to this television. It's its own television. It's one of those smart TVs that just has all the inner workings into it. It turned on, and I heard it, and it woke my son up. And it's hell getting him back to sleep at that time, but it's happened to that television too.
Doors closing, children's toys going off at random, and things being thrown with force. Now, I don't think the secret lasted too long. Both Mike and Susan were now witnessing these strange events which were getting harder to explain. Also, just for context, Mike actually designs and installs smart home systems in some of the more affluent areas of Houston, such as River Oaks, Midtown, and the Galleria area. So it's only natural that when something happens with the electronics in his own house, he goes into diagnostics mode. I actually cut out quite a bit of tech talk in regards to debunking the TV phenomenon, but I mention it to reiterate the logical thought process that both Mike and Susan go through when these incidents occur. Admittedly, if this incident had been isolated or even only happened to one of the TVs, I probably would have brushed it off. After all, it's my job to remain evenly on the fence of skeptic and believer. But to have this happen multiple times and in different areas of the house with different televisions, you kind of have to submit to the fact that maybe, just maybe, there is something strange going on here.
I was playing with my daughter, and this is another experience that I had. With my daughter being nonverbal, we have our own way of playing hide and seek. Usually within, as you know, with autistic children, you do a redirection. And so we'll distract her for a little bit, and then I'll go hide. And she'll usually hear me run away. She's very observant of her surroundings. And so she'll notice that I'll go away, and I'll go and hide in one of the various closets in the house. And this one time, I went into the master. It's a decent walk-in closet. And so I was behind the door in the dark, waiting. I put on the bathroom light because that casts a glow into the master. So that way, if she does come in, she's not scared or hesitant. Because I usually do jump out and scare her just for shits and giggles. And she takes that in stride. She's actually very, very good about, me just messing with her. But this one time, I was sitting here hiding behind the door, and I can hear behind me clothes rustling. Now, the back of this door is almost in the middle of the closet. So if the end of the closet is right here, the door is actually all the way up here. And so I'm standing right here, so I'm hearing the clothes behind me shuffle. And I'm sitting here thinking like, okay, maybe... At that point, I didn't know. But I was like, okay, whatever. And so I can finally hear my daughter, and you could always hear her, she always has these little squeals and hums and all that kind of stuff. All of a sudden, I heard right behind me, hangers on a dowel move. And then I saw the clothes go like that by the time I turned around. And I was like, holy shit, what just happened? And at that time, my daughter found me. So right when that happened, my daughter was maybe 10 feet away from me. So I didn't really have time to kind of sit there and guess and all that kind of stuff. But it was something that it was just like, oh wow, what the hell just happened? And that's something I can't explain, because if I'm all the way up here and the clothes move all the way back here, there's no way. Especially it was jackets. So they've got some weight to them. And then that exact night, I went out, and sometimes I'm a fat kid at heart, I like to get myself a midnight snack. And that night, I was walking out to the kitchen, and out of the side of the kitchen, I thought I saw a head peeking out from the side. Now, it was dark, but I plainly saw somebody peek out of the side of my fridge, because right behind it is the dining room. And he poked out and then went back in. And so I walked over there real quick. There was nothing there. It looked like it was somebody like checking. It really just it gave me a little shiver, because I stopped for a moment when I saw it. And then I was like, okay, who the fuck's in my house? And I took off, and there was nothing there. And that was one that I told my wife, and she goes, don't tell me that. She has forbade me getting cameras into this house. She's like, if you get physical proof that this stuff is happening, I can't live here. And we can't afford to move. There was one night I was putting my son to sleep. And this is the first time I ever felt threatened. This would be the first time I've really, all of a sudden, was really caught off guard. My son, he will not sleep in his crib, because he just moves. He just rolls all over the place, which wakes him up. So he'll toss and turn, and he'll be up screaming. So one day I got the idea of putting a memory foam mattress topper on the ground with a really comfy blanket, and he slept all night. It worked like a dream, because he could flop about, and it's not hurting anything. As long as he was on that mattress pad, he was good. So one night I was putting him to bed, and he was in my arms. I was watching television as I was feeding him the bottle, and I hit a pause in the program, and I look over and I see what looks like, it didn't even really look like legs. It just looked like as if I were to have a highlight marker, like a big silhouette of a highlighted marker, and there were two of them. It was like as if there was these two almost like peg legs, that's the best description I could give, standing right in front of the door. And I saw it, and I assumed my wife, every once in a while, she usually never wants me to go very far, or for very long. And so whenever I take longer than usual to do something, she'll come and check on me. And so I had assumed at that time it was my wife listening to see if she can hear, the baby cry, or me shuffling around, or something like that. But then I heard my wife yelling at my daughter in the master bedroom. And I look over and I still see the two things. And I sit there and I stare at it. It was still there. My blood ran cold. Like, I'm even like, it gives me a shiver just to think about it right now. And I saw it. 5 seconds later, it disappeared. Once again, trying to get into that frame of mind of what could that have been. The only logical explanation I could think of is that my wife had possibly been there. But the fact that I heard her in the master, and this house is full on hardwood. There is no carpet in this house whatsoever. So the likelihood of her being able to walk up, or my daughter being able to walk up without me hearing it, near impossible. My daughter has flat feet, so whenever you hear her coming, you hear slap, 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 slap. And the fact that it wasn't shaped as a foot on the silhouette. Usually, if it was a foot, it would have been wider. But this, if I were to take a guess, it was maybe 2 inches in width. I don't know what it was, and it was the first time. I was really scared. And so after it left, I kind of creeped out, and I looked at there, and there was nothing there. When that happened, I didn't tell my wife about it, because how badly it scared me. And I didn't want her to freak out because she does believe in the paranormal. You know, her culture has their own superstitions about it. So I hid that one from her for a while.
This first meeting with Mike took place in March of 2024. Now, Mike generally keeps me updated through text whenever anything happens in the house, which is quite often. One day, in early May, after a very Houstonian rainstorm that had knocked out power to the whole area, I was driving around with a colleague, desperately trying to find somewhere that was open for lunch, when I got an excited phone call from Mike. He managed to snap a picture of this thing. In an episode almost identical to what we'll refer to as the feet beneath the door, Mike was laying in his son's room when he looked up and saw a silhouette. There was something in the hallway, directly on the other side of the bedroom door. His phone in hand, he had the wherewithal to take a picture before the thing just disappeared. He took the photo, looked at it, and when he looked back up from his screen, there was nothing there. He immediately jumped up and flung the door open, but he already knew there'd be nothing there to cause this shadow. He sent me photos while we were still on the phone. He also sent me backup photos of objects in the same location to prove that he couldn't replicate the image. This case is ongoing, so there will be no definitive conclusion, but join me in the next episode and we'll take a trip up to Mike and Susan's house to get a feel for the neighbourhood firsthand. We'll hear some of Susan's perspective and even discover more about the strange feet beneath the door. Thank you for joining me on this first instalment of Houston Strange. My aim with this project is to get more involved with the people of Houston, find out more personal experiences, maybe learn some more of the local history and build some sense of community. Ideally, we could use this platform to help promote local businesses and charities. If you have a story that you'd like to share or know someone with a story, please visit houstonstrange.com and follow me on Instagram under the name Houston Strange. It doesn't necessarily have to be a ghost story or a haunting either. I'm open to all sorts of weird and wonderful stories. You can also check out houstonstrange.com for bonus content. I'll be posting pictures and little pieces of audio and maybe even videos that I've collected along the way. They might not have made it into the main episode, but they're still interesting tidbits. Think of it kind of like DVD extras. Also, if you or anyone you know has a local or small business in the Houston or greater Houston area and you want to promote it, please also reach out. Until the next episode, stay strange, Houston.